The guy stood in front of a dark door that exuded a dark atmosphere. A black, blurry shadow in the form of a hand reached his shoulder. The dark blob surrounded the guy completely and whispered in his ear if he really wanted to go through that door, because he wouldn't be able to get back out of it once he got inside. The boy slowly took a step forward. A dark shadow enveloped him completely. Covering the door behind him, she accepted his choice. Suddenly, the black-haired man woke up abruptly. He was breathing heavily from sleep, rising from the bed, thinking that he had had this nightmare all the time before, and it had been a long time since he had dreamed anything like this. His gaze darted to the calendar. A red marker had October 19th circled and signed Jaehan's birthday. The guy smiled at his thoughts and decided it was time to get ready for work. As the main character was adjusting his tie before going out, the phone rang. He got a call from the chairman, the guy answered. Leaving the room, he asked about the chairman's well-being. The man admitted that he didn't feel as bad as he used to and asked Yoon-il how he was doing. The guy was doing well and apologized for not visiting the chairman as often. The chairman looked sickly, sitting in a chair with an IV. The man suddenly suggested a family dinner since it was Jahan's birthday. The man, clutching his head and writhing in pain, said he had something to discuss with Jaehan, but he was hard to reach. He realized that Jaehyun had been very busy since he had handed over the CEO position to him, but he needed to tell him that his younger brother had returned to Korea. The chairman asked Yoon-il to be sure to bring Jaehan to dinner. The guy wanted to say something else, but the man hung up. Yoon-il, exhaling and picking up his jacket, was a little sad that the table he had specifically booked to be with Jaehyun tonight would have to be canceled. But since the chairman had asked to come to dinner, the matter was urgent. IDBIO is a world-renowned medical corporation, a leader in research and development of new drugs and clinical trials, and is actively investing in universities and hospitals both in Korea and around the world. The boy was greeting his colleagues as he passed by the workstations. He had been under the chairman's care since he was a child. A tall man with blonde hair walked into his office. It was Nam Jae-chun. He was 31 years old, was the current CEO of IDBIO. He was the son of the chairman and a childhood friend of the protagonist. Suddenly, the man grabbed Yoon-il's hand. The guy, blushing a little, copied what he was doing. Jaehyun sprayed some perfume on him and started sniffing. Yoon-il had actually been in love with Jaehyun for the past 10 years. The man sniffed and was satisfied and asked the guy's opinion. Yoon-il sniffed, smelling citrus. He was surprised because it was atypical for him. The man didn't really like sweet scents. Jaehyun revealed that he has a date with Professor Quack's daughter. She loves citrus scents, so the man decided to give her this perfume, but the guy was surprised since he just broke up. But he didn't finish. Yoon-il changed the topic to his birthday. He told him that he had made a reservation so they could celebrate together. But Jaehyun had forgotten that it was his birthday. Yoon-il snickered and reminded him that he'd forgotten about it last year too. The man took off his jacket and walked to his chair. The guy had warned him that he couldn't skip tonight because the chairman wanted to have dinner with him. But Jaehyun asked to put in a good word for him with the chairman. Since he was his secretary, Yoon-il told him that the man needed to take better care of him since his health was deteriorating, and also informed him that his brother was now in Korea. The brother's name was Nam Pil-woo. The main character had already forgotten him, but Jaehyun recalled that they played as kids. Now the guy is back in Korea since he finished his studies abroad. Yoon-il remembered a moment from his childhood, and he himself was surprised how he could have forgotten about it and only remembered it now, because they always played together when he came to their house. The boy wanted to say something else, but Jaehyun suddenly took his face with both hands and told him that he didn't need to remember him, because he wasn't that important to him. The man moved closer to his ear and said he would call his father. He apologized for not being able to have dinner with him tonight, but promised to go out next time. Yoon-il was saddened by this, because he was really looking forward to this day, but there was nothing left for him to do but just agree with Jaehyun. The guy was standing at the exit of the cafe with a box containing a cake. He had taken it, but now he didn't know what to do with it. He had specially ordered Jaehan's favorite cake, but he figured that even if they couldn't blow out the candles together, he could get him over to his house this weekend. Suddenly, he was called. The guy turned around and saw a man who looked like Jaehan. Yoon-il recognized him immediately. It was Pil-woo. They were sitting in a restaurant. The man was pleasantly surprised, for he didn't think he would run into him here. The guy replied that he was sorry they couldn't have dinner as a family. He admitted that he'd heard he was back, but he apologized for not being able to talk Jaehan into freeing up the evening. But Pil-woo asked him not to worry about it, because through this they met. He was 27 years old and was the second son of the ID Bio chairman. Yoon-il looked at him and felt uncomfortable. The man was very similar to Jaehan. Suddenly, Pil-woo put his hand on Yoon-il's hand, rubbing his fingers a little, asking how he was doing, and confessed that he missed him a lot, and he thought about him every day while he was away, and he wondered if Yoon-il was thinking about him. Yoon-il felt awkward. He didn't remember much about him. Suddenly, he got a call. He picked up the phone. It was Jae-hyun. The guy was all glowing, which didn't escape Pil-woo. The man asked about work. The guy told him everything, looking at the cake. Yoon-il, blushing a little, asked if he could come over to his house in the morning because he wanted to treat him to the cake. But Yekin replied that it wouldn't be possible in the morning because he planned to return only in the afternoon. Suddenly, the guy remembered that he had a date. He clenched his trembling hand into a fist. He was saddened that the man would be with the girl until the morning. He hung up. Pil-woo saw the guy's condition and suggested he order more wine. He poured it for him. Pil-woo noticed that Yoon-il was drinking quickly. He asked if it was okay. After all, it was the second bottle. The guy replied that it was fine and he wanted to have a drink tonight anyway. The man guessed that with Jae-hyun and voiced his guess, causing Yoon-il's eyes to round. Pil-woo noticed that the guy missed Jaehan a lot. He himself felt bad that while he was gone, the two of them were having fun together. Pil-woo, swirling the wine glass in his hands, wondering how long they'd been socializing, his hand twitched and the box of cake rolled to the floor. Pil-woo, not much bothered by this prank, calmly apologized while Yoon-il excitedly jumped up from his seat behind the cake. Pil-woo took advantage of this impulse. He grabbed the guy's hand, Yoon-il leaned over him, and the man suggested that he should go home tomorrow afternoon too. When the main character was 14 years old, he had an accident. He was at Jahan's house right before summer vacation and fell from the third-floor balcony. The girl was sitting beside Yoon-il's bed. A young man in a black suit stood behind her, poking at his phone. It was 4 months before he opened his eyes again. The seasons had changed and there was a chill in the air. A man called on the phone to report that the boy was awake. There was something about Yoon-il that bothered him more than the change of season. The blonde man, who was panting, came to check on Yoon-il. The boy was happy to see Jaehan appear. The blonde boy hurriedly walked over to Yoon-il's bed. He had left school early when he heard he was awake and ran over to him. The guy was worried about how Yoon-il felt and how he even managed to fall off the balcony. But Yoon-il didn't remember anything. Suddenly, Jae-hyun reached into his backpack. He and his class had made a card, so he was going to show it. He revealed it in front of Yoon-il. Each person had written a small message for him at the blonde man's request. Yoon-il taking the card, incomprehensibly examining everything. They were in 7th grade, but in Yoon-il's memory, he was still in 6th, reading the names of his classmates. He didn't remember them. Jae-hyun was dumbfounded. Everyone in the room was shocked. Yoon-il had lost all his memories from the previous year. Jae-hyun's father gave them generous support during his recovery. He put him in an ID Bio-run hospital and paid all the hospital bills. He made sure that once Yoon-il regained consciousness, he would receive quality care. Jae-hyun came to the hospital every day after school. Yoon-il was worried about whether he would have to re-enroll in middle school. Jae-hyun reassured him that he would continue to be in the same class with him that way. And with his attendance, his dad could plug in his connections. Jaehan was willing to help him catch up on missed classes because he wanted to be there for him. As he approached him and touched his forehead to Yoon-il's forehead, he offered to study together, to go to high school together. He promised to make sure that they wouldn't separate. Pil-woo pressed Yoon-il against the wall and kissed him. The man unzipped his jacket and asked him if this was something he wanted to do to Jaehan. The guy blushing wanted to say something, but the elevator arrived at the right floor. The blonde man took Yoon-il's hand and dragged him along, closing the door behind him. Pil-woo getting close to the guy and warning him that so they wouldn't have a misunderstanding, he wasn't dragging him here by force. Pil-woo suggested that Yoon-il was tired of holding back the feelings he'd been suppressing for years, and went along with it, and reassured that he'd given the blonde man a chance because he was lonely. The blonde had no intention of being a substitute and asked to be forgotten, taking his face, asking him to focus on what he was doing to him now. Yoon-il clenched the covers, lying on the bed beneath Pil-woo, the man on top of him pressing his hand against the bed. The blonde man was kissing him. They were having fun. As they were having fun and approaching the big moment, A memory came to mind of how Pil-woo wanted to see Yoon-il as a child after his injury. But his father wouldn't let him. He ordered him to get ready to go to America. He was being transferred to a local school. The boy was grabbed by the arm. He was against it and didn't understand why he was being transferred. The father asked to do as he said. And from then on, Mr. Park was to take care of the boy. Pil-woo following his father, who held his hand tightly, shouting that he did not want to go to America. During the interesting moments, Pil-woo hovering over Yoon-il revealed that he thought the guy would contact him sooner or later. He sent him messages every holiday and every birthday, but the guy never responded. The thought of what his reaction would be when they met allowed Pil to stay strong. The man saw that Yoon-il had given his heart to Ye-hyun. Yoon-il, covering himself with a pillow, wanted to ask something, but he couldn't. Pil-woo clutched him tightly in his arms. The man admitted that he was relieved to know that the two of them hadn't gotten that far in the years he'd been gone. For 17 whole years, he had been deprived of being near him, and Pil-woo wasn't going to wait any longer. His jacket left in the living room, the phone in his pocket ringing. Morning came. The guy woke up and sat up on his bed, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Pil-woo came into the room. Yoon-il grabbed his head. His head was splitting. His eyes were blurry, and at first he thought it was Jaehyun. But then he looked closer and shuddered. He looked at him awkwardly. Pil-woo crouched on the edge of the bed and handed him a mug of water, asking if his throat was okay. Yoon-il stretched out his trembling hands to take the mug. The man asked if he had any pain. The guy was immediately reminded of all the racy moments from last night, which made him darken and blush embarrassedly, wondering what he had done. After so many years of loving Jaehyun, he couldn't believe he had tried to ease his loneliness with the help of another man, and that man happened to be his little brother. Yoon-il, holding the mug with trembling hands, kept wondering what had happened to his self-control, and whether his feelings could even be considered sincere after this. He was disgusted with himself. The guy with his head down said he was sorry. He promised it wouldn't happen again. He just took advantage of the situation because there was an opportunity. Pil listened to him in surprise, and then he laughed, Yoon-il glaring at him. Pil-woo realized that Yoon-il had him first. He wanted to apologize to him himself, but he beat him to it. The blonde man touched his cheek with his hand and apologized for being rude to him. Pil-woo, getting very close to the guy and saying that he hadn't changed at all, kissed him. He intercepted the mug from his hands, setting it on the nightstand, plopped Yoon-il on the bed. When the blonde man pulled away, Yoon-il said it won't happen again. Since it was too late for breakfast, Pil-woo suggested he have lunch, or he suggested he stay late and then have dinner. But Yoon-il sat on the bed, wiping his lips, apologizing, and replied that he had to go. Pil-woo decided to give him a ride. They were riding in the elevator. Yoon-il annoyingly noticed that he forgot to charge his phone. He pulled it out and saw a missed one from Jaehyun. The guy was surprised by that. He wanted to call him back, but he was still with Pil-woo. When the elevator arrived, Yoon-il decided he would call back as soon as he was alone. They came out of the elevator and right in front of them stood Jaehyun. He greeted Yoon-il cheerfully. The guy froze. He blushed in a flash. Jaehyun didn't expect to see his friend here along with Pil-woo, his younger brother, glaring angrily. Jaehyun asked if they had been together all night. Yoon-il's heart started beating fast with excitement. He blushed and tried to excuse himself, but suddenly Pil-woo jumped in. The man said that since Yoon-il's plans were canceled, he offered to take him out to dinner, and since he had been drinking a bit, he couldn't drive. But Yekin said he could have gone home to see the rest of the family, because his father would have been happy to see him. Pil-woo replied that he could take care of his own schedule, and moreover, Jaehyun himself had run away from the family meeting to have a date. But as it turned out, unfortunately for Jaehyun, it ended before it started. After some talking, the older man asked for a ride home too. Yoon-il suggested that they go home together, and he drove his car so he could leave by himself. They said their goodbyes. Jaehyun cheerfully beckoned Pil-woo to go. The younger one was not so cheerful. While they were in the car, Jaehyun kept his eyes on his younger brother. Pil-woo was pissed off and asked why he was looking at him. But the man said he just noticed that he looked healthy. He told him that his father hadn't been feeling well lately, but now he hoped that when Junior came back, his father would feel better. Pil-woo didn't say anything back. He wrapped up in the garage of the house. They were greeted. Jaehyun offered Pil-woo to eat together. Their father came out to them with a crutch. A threatening aura hovered around him as he said he was glad his son had returned. Pil-woo looked at him contemptuously without answering anything. Father, Pil-woo, and Jae-chin sat around the table. Father was aware of how his son had spent his time in the States thanks to the reports he had received. He was glad the guy had served in the military and gotten a degree in business management, and Pil-woo hadn't had a single seizure while he was away. Pil-woo started to snicker, but Jaehan hurriedly softened the situation by saying that it was their first time in years to have a family dinner, and he was also waiting for news from him, just like his father. Father said that since Pil-woo was back in Korea, he had to declare himself to ID Bio as a family member. Dad appointed him to lead their corporate strategy team. Pil-woo asked if they were sure, as the position seemed pretty important. Jae-chin replied that he was part of Nam's family. He had high hopes for him as a brother, and so did his father. Pil-woo rose from his seat. He inquired about his room. If everything was still in the same place, Jae-chin replied that they hadn't touched it. The man went to his room on the second floor, and when he got there, he saw that nothing had changed. Pil-woo sat on the bed. It was too small for him now. He lay down on it and remembered when he was little, crying in bed while his daddy left the room. But remembering the night with Yoon-il, he blushed a little and smiled. He wanted to make sure the guy could never stay in this place again. The man stood up, pulled out his phone, dialing someone's number. He stepped back to the window. He was calling Park, the man who had been watching over him this time in America. He had promised him to destroy ID Bio. Yoon-il came to work, a little downcast. He was worried. Suddenly, Jae-hyun had gotten it all wrong. He couldn't believe he ran into him at the hotel, and that's why he couldn't sleep a wink over the weekend. Yoon-il, walking down the corridor and saying hello to his coworkers, thought that he couldn't accidentally meet Pil-woo here, but he didn't know what he should do if they met. The boy, having arrived at his seat, decided to act perfectly normal in front of Jaehan, for he must never find out about anything. Before opening the door to Jaehan's office, Yoon-il was determined to say hello to him as usual. But when he entered the office and the man said hello to him, the guy froze. He launched into a rambling panic speech. Jaehan didn't really pay attention. He had urgent business to attend to. Yoon-il started talking a lot, which didn't escape Jaehan. He asked if the guy had a good rest over the weekend. The guy held out his papers to him. The man suddenly grabbed his hand, asking what he and Pil-woo had to discuss. Yoon-il replied that he didn't really. But Jaehyun noticed that Pil-woo looked like he was worried about the guy, and he got the impression that something special had happened between them. The guy's heart was beating excitedly. He replied that they just hadn't seen each other in a long time, and nothing special had happened that day. Jae-chin removed his hand. Standing up, he admitted that he was worried about Pil-woo, since he had spent so much time studying abroad alone. Yoon-il was surprised. Since the guy was a close friend of Haehyun, he decided in good faith to warn Yoon-il not to let Pil-woo get too close to him. The boy didn't understand. Then Yeshin told him that there was a man, Mr. Park. He was Pil-woo's attending physician, and he told Jae-chin how the younger brother had spent his years abroad. He said that Pil-woo had a lot of problems at school and the like, and there were some nasty rumors surrounding him. Rumors that he seduced single women to sleep with them. There were also rumors that he took drugs. While Jae-hyun was telling Yoon-il all this, the guy was getting more and more shaky. He grabbed his hand to calm himself down. Jae-hyun put his hand on his shoulder and said he was worried that Yoon-il might get hurt or be dragged into a situation he didn't want to be in. Jae-chin admitted that it was frustrating that he couldn't understand Pil-woo, even though he was his brother, but he had to learn to cooperate with him since they were going to run the company together. Yoon-il. The news that Pil-woo will join the board of directors was very shocked. Jae-hyun said that Pil-woo will first head the corporate strategy team from today, looked at his watch and warned that he will be here soon. Yoon-il was very excited. Pil-woo was walking down the corridor. All the staff were curious. They escorted him with a glance. Yoon-il was gloomier than a cloud. He didn't know what to do, because he thought the office was the last place where he could run into Pil-woo. Looking at Jaehan, he thought that if the man found out about what had happened at the hotel, he would definitely be disappointed. The door to the office opened and Pil-woo walked in. Big Brother greeted him in a friendly manner. He introduced him to Yoon-il. The guy was his secretary. When Pil-woo looked at Yoon-il, the guy shuddered. He gave him the courtesies of his position. Pil-woo promised to try his best to live up to expectations and asked Yoon-il to take care of him. They shook hands. When Pil-woo started asking about Saturday and if he had a normal ride home, the guy got even more gloomy. The man discreetly rubbed his thumb across his hand. Yoon-il replied. Pil-woo grinned and suddenly broke the handshake. Pil-woo stepped back to his brother and asked where the management department was. Jae-hyun replied that the head of human resources was supposed to be coming up soon and would give him a tour. Yoon-il stood back in mixed feelings. He didn't realize what it was. It seemed to him that Pil-woo wanted to tell him something. A supervisor came into the office and Pil-woo left with her. As soon as the door closed behind him, Pil-woo exhaled in relief. He was glad Pil-woo hadn't said anything, because the man might have decided that what had happened between them was an excuse to get close to him. He needed to be more careful with him. Jae-hyun responded strangely. Yoon-il didn't understand him, but the man didn't explain anything. He turned around and walked over to the nightstand. Taking out a pill from there and drinking it down, he asked Yoon-il what his schedule was, if there was anything special. He only had a meeting in the afternoon. Guy, talking about the meeting, thought that what happened at night was a mistake, and he was sure that if he kept his distance, Pil-woo would eventually lose interest. That's what he thought. But since that day, Yoon-il had encountered Pil-woo so often that it had begun to alarm him. Right now, the guy met Pil-woo in the hallway with coffee. They said hello. The man offered Yoon-il coffee. He bought some for his co-workers. It was also strange for Yoon-il that Pil-woo didn't try to contact him outside of work at all. Yoon-il, taking a cup of coffee in his hands, noticed that the man had taken a certain amount for his team, but Pil-woo suggested he take his own coffee because he was leaving for a meeting anyway. The protagonist, looking at Pil-woo's back, thought he didn't need anything more from him after neither slept together, and remembered that he was cute when he was a kid. Truthfully, he remembered the scraps of memories he had. The receptionist behind the counter told Yoon-il that Mr. Pil-woo was surprisingly good at his job. Despite his lack of experience, his team was positive. Yoon-il thought that since he wasn't causing any trouble, he would be fine. The guy sat at his computer and worked. Jae-hyun came out of the office. He was going home. Yoon-il had a few more things to finish. Jae-hyun thanked him for his work, but expressed concern that at this rate he wouldn't see the guy get married. The boy joked back and wished for rest. Jae-hyun asked him not to stay out late. Yoon-il gave him a final smile. As soon as the man left, Yoon-il sank his forehead heavily onto the table, unable to understand how Jae-hyun could talk about such things so easily. His phone vibrated, the guy staring at the screen, unable to understand why the deputy manager of corporate strategy was calling him at this hour. He picked up the phone. The manager apologized for calling late and asked where Yoon-il was now. The guy didn't understand. Then it was explained to him on the other wire that he and his team had gone to rest. They had gone to a welcome party for Mr. Nam and all wanted to drink with him, but it seemed to be too much for Pil-woo, and he was now asleep on the table and unable to stand on his feet. Pil-woo entered Yoon-il's number to the manager. When he asked him who to call, the manager, almost crying, explained that Pil-woo himself had said he needed to go home to sleep, but didn't give his address, but said Yoon-il would take care of everything. So the manager asked Yoon-il to help them with Mr. Pil-woo. The guy at this time was pondering if it was okay for him to go there, and he was also worried that if he stayed alone with Pil, something bad would happen again. But if he didn't go, he would feel guilty, and Yoon-il believed deep down that Pil-woo wouldn't hurt him. He rose from his seat, promising he would be there soon. Yoon-il arrived at the bar and went inside. He was called by the manager. He was next to Pil-woo. The kid apologized again for it was late. Yoon-il asked how Mr. Nam was. He was sleeping and didn't move. Pil-woo put his hand on the guy's shoulder. They walked towards the exit. The manager worriedly asked if he could handle it by himself. The guy said he would do everything and asked the guy to make sure everyone else got home. The manager bowed, smiling politely. He thought that Mr. So Yoon-il was stronger than they thought. After all, it took them 3 grown men to lift Mr. Nam. Yoon-il somehow dragged Pil-woo to the car, got behind the wheel himself, and said he'd make Jae-hyun pay him overtime for it. The guy pulled into the road, and Pil-woo opened his eyes. They arrived at Pil-woo's house. The guy called out to him, but the man pretended to still be asleep. Yoon-il unbuckled himself and got out of the car. They went inside the house. Pil-woo was hanging on Yoon-il's shoulder. They were greeted by a helper and thanked Yoon-il for his help. The guy replied that Pil-woo had had too much to drink. He was about to leave, but suddenly the man pulled him. He started fumbling with his hands around the guy. Yoon-il was scared. Pil-woo finally found his keys in the guy's pocket. He got them and handed them to the deputy to park the car out front. He warned him that they would be spending the night in the guest room on the 2nd floor, so he asked not to be disturbed. Yoon-il was surprised by this turn. He thought Pil-woo had drunk himself into oblivion. The man led him by the hand to the second floor. As they reached the room, Yoon-il realized that Pil-woo was pretending to be asleep. The man replied to him that he had very little to drink, so he couldn't pass out. And he did it because it was the only way to see him alone. Because if he asked him to meet with him one-on-one, Yoon-il wouldn't come. And separately, Yoon-il had it all written on his face. The guy muttered something. They entered the room. Pil-woo plopped Yoon-il on the bed, hovering over him. He suggested him to go to work tomorrow morning from here. The man promised not to touch Yoon-il. The guy took a sip and worriedly said that he had to go. He once again said that that night was a mistake and Yoon-il didn't want to do it again. Pil-woo chuckled and plopped down next to Yoon-il, and yet he could see that it comforted the guy. The protagonist didn't agree. The man, watching Yoon-il's reaction, decided to still finish with the news that Jae-hyun was sound asleep in the room next to them. Yoon-il was immediately embarrassed and exclaimed that Pil-woo set this up on purpose. Pil-woo said that if he was lucky, he could have breakfast with him tomorrow morning and drive to work in his car. Pil-woo took the guy by the shoulder and turned him towards him. He let him use himself. Yoon-il didn't understand why he was doing this. The man squeezed his foot between Yoon-il's legs. As he approached him, he replied that it wasn't just so he could work with him. Pil-woo hovered sharply over Yoon-il. Deepening the kiss, the man began to undress the guy little by little. When the blonde man had already taken off the guy's shirt, Yoon-il asked him to stop, because the man had promised not to touch him. But Pil-woo, stooping lower, replied that he wasn't going to go all the way. He wanted to make Yoon-il feel good. After some interesting moments, Pil-woo pulled away from Yoon-il. The guy was suddenly attracted by his eyes. The man spat on Yoon-il. He apologized because it was hard for him to hold back when it came to him. Mentally, he forced himself to pull himself together because he was afraid that Yoon-il would hate him if he continued. He reminded himself that he had waited all these years and convinced himself that he had to be patient until the right moment came. He told Yoon-il that he would keep his promise and not go all the way. Since Pil-woo was lying on top of a naked Yoon-il, the guy felt some discomfort down below. He asked him to wait, because every time he moved, the man rubbed his shirt against his skin. Pil-woo placed a hickey on Yoon-il's neck, licking the spot. He pulled away and promised to help him with all his business. Yoon-il asked him to stop, but it was too late. The guy, shivering with his whole body, asked to stop and untie him, but Pil-woo got out of bed and left the room. Yoon-il started wriggling on the bed to disentangle his hands from his shirt. The man brought a towel. Yoon-il immediately sat down. Pil-woo knelt beside him and wiped him, and then helped him free himself from his shirt. Pil-woo turned off the light, covering the boy with a blanket and hugging him, suggested he go to bed, promising he wouldn't do anything else. But Yoon-il, turning to him, said that they had some things to discuss. Pil-woo only replied that everything is tomorrow. The guy woke up in the morning. He was alone in the room. Sitting up on the bed, he looked around. He remembered exactly that he was with Pil-woo yesterday. Yoon-il suddenly remembered everything from the night before and covered his face with his hands in embarrassment at the thought of it happening again. The boy met Jahan in the living room. The blonde had heard that the man had come to their house late last night. Jae-hyun said that Yoon-il should have woken him up, but the guy replied that he couldn't since he didn't even say he was coming. The blonde asked about his brother, but Yoon-il hadn't seen him since last night. Then Jae-hyun offered the guy breakfast. Yoon-il asked about the chairman, but he had his caregivers serve breakfast to his room, the two of them sitting alone in the kitchen. Jae-hyun, taking a bite of the loaf, said it reminded him of their childhood, because Yoon-il used to come over every day after school to play together. Yoon-il remembered his mom scolding him for spending more time there than at home, and he was here for the first time since that incident years ago. Jae-hyun asked how it felt, if anything had changed, but Yoon-il said that they had everything just as beautiful, and the house was perfect for hiding. Yoon-il remembered how they set off fireworks in the backyard in the summer. They even set up a tent, and he also remembered Pil-woo watching them from his room on the 3rd floor. When they were little, Yoon-il, holding a firework, asked about younger brother Hae-hyun that they could play together, but the older one replied that Pil-woo would get tired quickly, so he would go to bed early. Little Yoon-il looked at the window where Pil-woo was looking out. He said it would be fun for everyone to play together. Suddenly, Jae-hyun ruffled Yoon-il's hair and suggested that they take the day off to be alone together today, just like old times. The guy, chuckling, disagreed, for they were no longer small children. They both laughed. After getting dressed, Chaehyun asked Yoon-il to wait for him outside because he forgot his phone in the room. The guy agreed. He went outside and met an old man. They said hello politely. Yoon-il asked how he was doing. The man was doing well. He said he heard that Yoon-il was driving the CEO today, so he was indebted to the guy for doing his job. The guy awkwardly replied that they were going to the same company anyway. The old man expressed that he would like Mr. Pil-woo to be assigned his own driver too. He went to work alone early in the morning. Yoon-il was surprised and asked if he always drove himself to work. The man replied that he seems to do everything by himself. There was no one to take care of him. Yoon-il looked frustrated. Jaehan came out of the house and beckoned him to move out already. Yoon-il gave a final bow and wished the man a good day. They reached the car. They talked about how winter was coming soon and it was time to get warm clothes. But Jaehan, looking at the guy's neck, noticed that the bugs were flying even in this weather. Yoon-il didn't understand him. Chaehyun reached out with his hand. He pointed at the hickey and assumed it was a bug bite. The boy blushed embarrassed. Remembering last night, he covered the hickey with his hand. Excitedly, he replied that he was so busy he didn't notice. Jaehan said he should work less. But Yoon-il, opening the car door, replied that it wasn't up to him, thinking that it couldn't go on like this, and he decided that he couldn't let it happen again. Yoon-il, buckling his belt, thought that he should meet Pil-woo and talk. Chaehyun and Yoon-il were already standing in the elevator. The blonde noticed that the guy was wearing the same suit as yesterday. Yoon-il got worried that he smelled bad and started sniffing himself. Chaehyun, chuckling, replied that he just thought he might be uncomfortable. Yoon-il said he had to go to a meeting in the afternoon, so he could stop by his place to change. The elevator arrived at their floor. When the doors opened, they spotted Pil-woo with a box and a bag in his hands. Jaehan was surprised that his brother came so early. Pil-woo didn't answer anything, but just handed the box to Yoon-il. He brought him a change of clothes, the guy accepting. Her was surprised. Jaehyun guessed that Pil-woo had purposely left so early in the morning to bring this to Yoon-il. Pil-woo, putting his arm around Yoon-il's shoulders, replied that the guy sweated a lot last night while he wasn't his to the second floor. Jaehyun assumed that Yoon-il had a hard time since Pil-woo was a big guy. Pil-woo, still hugging the guy, asked him to try it on. He hoped he remembered the size correctly. Yoon-il flinched a second time. The guy thanked him. He was sure everything would fit perfectly, mentally wondering if he would ever get a heart attack over them. Jae-shin hurried Yoon-il to go and change his clothes. The guy thanked Pil-woo once more. The man was still standing there watching. Jaehyun turned to him, asking if he would get to work, but Yoon-il asked him to wait because he needed to talk to Pil-woo. He led Pil-woo away, nudging under his back, promising Jaehan that he'd be back in a minute. The blonde man remained standing in the same spot outside the office, exhaling tiredly and covering his eyes. He hummed thoughtfully. Pil-woo and Yoon-il were sitting in a cafe. The guy had already changed his clothes, and the man appreciated that the suit suited him well. Yoon-il, swallowing, started to say why he took him aside. He mumbled restlessly, summarizing that Pil-woo was interested in his body, not him as a person, but he also assumed he liked him. To this question, Pil-woo gave a clear yes. He admitted that for the past 17 years, and the first time in his life, and the only thing that mattered, he always loved Yoon-il. The guy was dumbfounded by his answer. Pil-woo felt sorry that Yoon-il didn't remember the times when they were kids, but he was still glad that they could see each other again. Pil-woo remembered his father's hand when he was little. It was rough and calloused, and his mother's hand was always icy. He reached out desperately, trying to grasp those hands that never gave him warmth, but in the end, they brought no comfort to him or each other. Their mother left, their father watching her from the window of the room, informing the boys that their mother would not return to this house again. Pil-woo cried to his heart's content, calling for his mother. But Jaehan was eerily calm. He agreed with his father. Everything was fine for him, and he understood why this was the case. His father stroked his head approvingly, saying that this was his boy, and he was glad that he understood him. Pil-woo stopped crying and looked at his father in surprise. There was nothing he could do. He felt as if he were alone on a desert island. And the first lesson he learned there, being all alone, was that there was no one to help him. A crowd of doctors came into their room. Father said that since all distractions were now eliminated, they could focus on treatment. He nodded to the doctors and demanded to take Pil-woo to the clinic. The boy frightenedly backed away. As soon as the boy realized that the situation had changed, he was overcome with a feeling of powerlessness. The doctor turned to the father and said that the boy was still young and should not have been rushed. But the father replied that they did not have much time. Pil-woo had been treated in their clinic for 4 years. His hands were bruised from the injections. He went back to his room and lay down on his bed. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside and quietly looked out. Jae-hyun and Yoon-il were partying there with fireworks. He still remembered that day, the day when all the flickering lights of hope had gone out, and giving up was the only thing he had left. It was almost 10 a.m. Pil-woo had to go. He got out of bed and left the room. Yoon-il was the first person who made him feel grateful to be alive. He met a boy in the hallway. The one introduced himself to him. That was the day he met the love of his life. The boy suddenly approached and cheerfully asked where he was going. Pil-woo fearfully pressed his back against the door. Yoon-il, noticing the blonde man's condition, the black-haired man awkwardly scratched the back of his head and apologized for scaring him. He waved his arms vigorously, assuring that he was not to be feared. He was just very glad that he finally had a chance to meet him. Yoon-il asked, didn't he know who he was? Pil-woo was confused, but he knew Yoon-il. The black-haired man was immediately happy. He noticed Pil-woo watching them from the window. He revealed that Jae-hyun told him that Pil-woo was too sick to play with them, but he didn't say what exactly he was sick with, so Yoon-il asked Pil-woo if he felt bad. The boy was confused. Yoon-il leaned one of his palm against his forehead and the other against his own. This way he watched the temperature. Pil-woo embarrassedly pulled away, shouting that he didn't have it and wasn't sick. But suddenly the doctor called him because it was time to take his medicine. Pil-woo disappointedly said he had to go. Yoon-il rummaged in his pocket and pulled out a candy bar and handed it to the boy, telling him to eat it after the medicine, because the sweetness should overpower the taste of bitterness after the pills. After waving at him one last time, Yoon-il said that he hoped Pil-woo would get better soon. Sweetness suddenly entered his life along with a sense of pure kindness, as if they were encased in the same candy. Pil-woo, trying to imagine its taste, did not dare to utter the words about not being able to play with him. For the first time in a long time, he was confronted with someone else's kindness. Holding her in his arms, he couldn't stop thinking about her. A doctor came into the office and placed a yellow-wrapped candy on the desk. The guy sitting at the desk assumed that Jahan's friend was visiting again today. The girl, pulling on her robe, replied that he asks her every time about Pil-woo's well-being and asks her to pass the candy. The other doctor replied that he wouldn't eat them anyway. Pil-woo lay on the couch and looked at the table where a few candies lay. The third doctor came up to him. He thought Pil-woo didn't like candy and asked him about it. The boy asked why he was asking that. The doctor told him he could eat one candy once in a while, but instead Pil-woo just looks at them and keeps saving up. The boy explained that it was because he didn't want to get used to being given them and then feel even more lonely when it stopped. The doctor thought for a moment and then finished for the day. The other doctors were surprised, but the man said he would hold a meeting to review the work done and told Chairman Nam and Jae-hyun to have a checkup too. Turning to Pil-woo, he allowed him to go to his room. He was going to ask Jae-hyun to come here so Pil-woo could meet his friend one-on-one. Pil-woo and Yoon-il sat on the floor at the table, the black-haired man noticing that this was the first time they had spent time together since that day. Yoon-il asked the boy if there was anything he wanted to do. He was also curious to know what the boy usually did for fun. Pil-woo replied that he's been spending all his time at the clinic since Mom left, after which he oohed and squirmed excitedly. He suddenly apologized to Yoon-il. The boy didn't understand what he was apologizing for. Then Pil-woo explained that he was talking about Mom, but he shouldn't do that. But Yoon-il replied that it was pointless, and if he wanted to talk about his mom, he should talk about her. After all, she was his mom. Pil-woo revealed that his father and Jae-hyun didn't like it when he did that. Yoon-il was concerned. He mumbled thoughtfully that everyone had their own ways of coping. Maybe it hurt them to talk about it. Yoon-il, stroking the boy's hair, said he could talk to him about his mom and promised not to tell anyone. Pil-woo immediately brightened up, unable to believe that he could even talk to Yoon-il about his mom. Yoon-il allowed and suggested that it was hard for him to keep everything to himself. Taking his hand, he thought the boy felt lonely, but he assured him that with him, he could be himself. Pil-woo looked at his hands in surprise, blushed, and lay down on the table. Pil-woo didn't know what they had talked about at that meeting, but from that day on, he started spending less time at the clinic. Of course, the horrible things they did to him there didn't stop completely, but he was happy to spend time with Yoon-il and Hyun. However, he didn't know then that this feeling of happiness would turn out to be so fleeting. The moment he was forcibly separated from Yoon-il and sent to the US, he lost hope again. As the boy stood looking out the window from his room, a man suddenly came to him and told him that Yoon-il would soon be released from the hospital. He also revealed that the boy had lost his memory. This news should be good for Pil-woo. The boy finally turned to the man and noticed the jar in his hand. It was the result of all the trials he had been through since he was a child. He threw them into Pil-woo's hands, saying that it wasn't the final product, but with ID Bio's current level of technology, it was the best they could do. Pil-woo had to start taking them and show restraint if he wanted to see his beloved Yoon-il again. The boy took out one pill and promised the man he could handle it. He was willing to do anything to see Yoon-il again. After that, life passed like a blur. He had no special memories or close friends. But even that meant nothing to him, because Yoon-il was the only one who gave his life meaning. Pil-woo immediately told Yoon-il that he wasn't going to give up. He knew the guy had feelings for Jaehan, but he was willing to be his excuse. In return, he was going to take advantage of his feelings. Pil-woo propped his cheek with his hand and said he would do anything Jaehyun didn't do. He warned Yoon-il that he hoped he would find the courage to reciprocate his feelings. Yoon-il, not looking directly at Pil-woo, asked what would happen if he wanted him to stop. Pil-woo replied that Yoon-il had suffered all these years because of Jaehyun, and asked if he would really be so cold to him when they were in the exact same situation. The man noticed that Yoon-il had changed, because he used to act like he was ready to get the moon for him. But the guy didn't remember that. Pil-woo admitted that when they met again, he acted impulsively. Seeing Yoon-il's face, his body reacted before he could think. He apologized and promised he wouldn't do anything that could get Yoon-il in trouble. Not outright promise, but he would try. Yoon-il felt it sounded lame. Pil-woo got up from his seat, saying that he shouldn't distract the guy from his work. Yoon-il kept thinking for what purpose Pil-woo told him this. He thought it was all a game to trick him. While they were riding in the elevator, he kept thinking. He believed it was all just to hook up with him a couple times, but the man also said he had waited 17 years for him. But it was hard to believe. In the restroom cafe, left alone, Yoon-il opened the box with the suit. The clothes looked very expensive. Looking at the package, the guy wondered what was in there. Opening it, Yoon-il took out his coat and scarf. The guy was thinking a lot. Suddenly, Pil-woo called out to him. Yoon-il raised his head. Pil-woo abruptly approached him and kissed him. Afterward, he went out first. Yoon-il was left alone in the elevator, thinking that nothing had changed, even though he had just said he wouldn't cause him any trouble. But he decided that for Pil-woo, a kiss was nothing. When the elevator arrived at his floor, the guy was wondering if he should have told Jaehan about it. When the doors opened, Yoon-il saw Jaehan with a girl. They had a nice conversation. The girl offered to have dinner with her father. The man did not refuse and said he would wait for a call. Yoon-il looked sad. He walked to his desk and asked who it was. Jaehyun replied that it was the youngest daughter of a biotech company whose stock had been rising lately. Jaehyun asked how it went with Pil-woo. Yoon-il didn't say anything. He couldn't say Pil-woo had feelings for him. But the guy thought Jaehyun could remember what happened between them. So Yoon-il awkwardly asked if he was close to Pil-woo when they were kids. But Jaehyun froze and asked why he was asking that. He suddenly made indifferently creepy eyes, questioning why the guy cared and whether Pil-woo had said anything to him. Yoon-il replied with a wince, worried that he forgot something important. Jaehyun suddenly walked over to the pun and hugged him, saying that nothing important had happened between them. He asked him to let go of those memories, because all that mattered was what was happening here and now. Jaehan admitted that he didn't want to lose Yoon-il. The guy was pleased. He pulled back a little and asked in what sense he meant it, but Jaehyun didn't understand him. Then Yoon-il changed the subject, saying it's okay and he's not going anywhere from him. Then Jaehyun said he should be his secretary even after 50 years. Yoon-il was a little surprised that it took so long. Jaehyun replied that there was no way he could do without him. After all, only when the guy was around did he feel at ease. The guy asked him to be honest that it was because he was doing all the work for him. Jaehyun guffawed and said he was counting on the guy at the conference next week. Suddenly, when Jaehan was about to leave for his office, he said that the suit looked strange on Yoon-il, and after saying that, he left, and the guy was left standing there surprised. A man brought the chairman to the conference in a wheelchair. Yoon-il began his report. Further, the conference was actively going on, discussing the results. Time was coming to an end. and the chairman said that everything he had heard was useless. He scolded that they were wasting the company's resources and a lot of time on pointless research. Yoon-il shuddered. Yeshin took off his glasses and sighed heavily. The chairman said he wasn't going to sit here and waste his time. He ordered everyone to get back to work, but asked Jeshin to stay to talk. Everyone left the conference room, Jaehan sitting back down and asking what was wrong this time, since he hadn't noticed any problems with the presentation. The father suddenly coughed. When the attack passed, he cried out that, and one of the investigations did not yield any results. Yekin patiently replied that everyone was doing their best, and the father should be patient. Chronic hallucination, dizziness, auditory and visual hallucinations, all of these symptoms of a nervous disorder did not converge into a specific diagnosis. It was a disease that was hereditary in their family. Yechin had heard about it throughout his life, but he himself had wondered if it was really such a critical illness. Father ranted that he was in no position to wait, and when Pil-woo returned, he wanted to order Jaehan to do something, but the man rising from his seat corrected his father. For him at this moment, Yeshin was the president of Nam. This change of tone made his father shudder. Jeshin also said that he had approached several companies to cooperate. Jaehyun, leaving, ordered his father to rest. He went up the floor to his office. He was immediately met by an excited Yoon-il. He ran up to him and started asking him how it went. He noticed that the chairman looked upset, but Yekin replied that it was no big deal. And his father was like that because he had become more sensitive as his symptoms had recently worsened. The man offered Yoon-il to have coffee in his office. The boy happily agreed. Suddenly, before he opened the door, Jaehyun froze. He noticed a bag of food on Yoon-il's table. They were sitting and drinking coffee. Jaehan asked if he could put his head on Yoon-il's lap. The guy flinched in surprise. The man asked why he was surprised. He had always let him lie on his lap when he was a child. But Jaehyun had persuaded Yoon-il. Jaehan, lying on his knees, admitted that he felt most at ease around him. His transition to CEO was quite abrupt as his father had to retire due to health issues. He thought he was quite successful in replacing him, but he was worried about not living up to his expectations. And even though he worked day and night for the good of the company and the family, he still wasn't good enough to replace his father. He confessed that he thought his father saw him as a way to make money rather than a family member. Wail reached out to him. But at the last moment, he froze and didn't dare. But Jaehan himself grabbed his hand and put it on his head. He let him stroke his head. Yoon-il immediately blushed, his heart beating faster. Jaehan admitted that it felt good. Suddenly, Jaehan brought up Pil-woo, which made the guy flinch. The man didn't want to lose Yoon-il and decided to remind him again about it. He complained that while his father did not recognize him as a competent CEO, Pil-woo denied his very existence. He never relied on Jaehan as a child, always keeping his distance, especially after their mother left after the divorce. Pil-woo was his only brother, but he seemed to mean less to him than an outsider. Jaehyun hoped there would come a time when they would understand each other. After all, they were brothers. He still couldn't understand why Pil-woo did that when what he really wanted appeared. He confessed to Yoon-il that he didn't know what to do. He had a lot to protect, but Pil-woo was ruining everything. Yoon-il cautiously asked if his memory loss had anything to do with Pil-woo. Jaehyun, after a bit of silence, replied that he couldn't tell him all the details. Because he liked the way things were now, Yoon-il wanted to say something, but Jaehyun interrupted him and reminded him that he had told him that he was worried that Yoon-il might get hurt. But he didn't listen to him. But Yoon-il assured him that he listened to his words very much. Then Jaehyun asked if he would listen to him no matter what he did. The guy agreed. Yechin got up off his knees and sat down on the couch. He asked the guy to do him a favor as a punishment for being distracted. On the phone, he showed him what to buy. He asked for a mass cake, but Yoon-il knew they only sold them on weekends. Tomorrow is just Saturday. The man reminded Yoon-il of that. The guy was glad because he couldn't give Jaehyun his birthday cake, so he was ready to buy him what he wanted. Yoon-il cheerfully promised to bring it on Monday. The guy was at the store. It was crowded today because it was a day off. He reached the cafe where they were selling that cake. Yoon-il cheerfully followed him, thinking he'd take it home right away so it wouldn't spoil. Suddenly, he saw Jaehan sitting in a cafe with a girl, smiling sweetly at her. Yoon-il froze in surprise. He suddenly remembered that Jaehyun called it a punishment. He was suddenly miffed. He backed up, thinking that it was really a punishment. Suddenly, the guy crashed into someone. He turned his head and saw Pil-woo. Yoon-il was surprised. The blonde guy turned his head towards his brother, seeing him with the girl. He grinned and realized the guy was being tested. Yoon-il snickered. Pil-woo asked if he would go in, but the guy didn't understand how he could go in there, because he didn't think Jae-han would want him there. The blonde looked at him and said it was even better for him if the guy didn't go in to say hello. They turned away and Pil-woo suggested Yoon-il go somewhere far away from here. The guy agreed. The guys were sitting on the sofa. Yoon-il was sad. He told Pil-woo everything. The man thought his brother was still just as dodgy. Since Yoon-il couldn't buy Jaehyun's cake right now, Pil-woo asked what he would do. The guy replied that he promised Jaehyun to buy the cake. He wanted to try to buy it in a few hours. The guy looked at Pil-woo and said he had to go, but the man decided to hang around with him. Yoon-il looked at him worriedly. He remembered that Jaehyun had asked him not to spend time with Pil-woo, but he couldn't tell him that. The guy asked the blonde guy what he was doing here and assumed Pil-woo wanted to go shopping. But Pil-woo leaned back and said he just wanted to get out of the house. He said that on weekends he would usually work out, go to the library or shopping. He would just spend the day alone and then come home in the evening. Pil-woo turned to Yoon-il and happily said that he was very lucky to meet Yoon-il today. The guy looked at him in surprise and then laughed. Pil-woo sounded like a teenager in love up to his ears. The guy saw that Pil-woo looked younger than him for the first time. Pil-woo embarrassedly replied that it was a 30-year-old who had the most trivial, unrequited love telling him that. Suddenly, Pil-woo asked if Yoon-il wanted to buy something for Jaehyun, because it was boring to follow directions all the time. So he suggested him to give Jaehyun a real gift. Yoon-il thought the idea seemed like a good one, and they had time, but he wasn't sure if Pil-woo wanted to help him with it. But suddenly, Yoon-il shuddered and thought that it sounded strange since the man had said he liked him. But Pil-woo replied that he wasn't going to help but try to confuse. And besides, he was sure that even if the guy gave him something that Jae-han would like, the chances of winning his heart were 0. The blonde was sure that Hae-hyun wasn't their kind of person who could love someone more than themselves. He stood up and told Yoon-il that what they were doing was what people called a date, and he almost immediately suggested that he go to a hotel. Pil-woo, seeing Yoon-il's frowning face, immediately said he was joking. The guy already knew, but he felt bad about it. He too got up and called the man to go shopping. After all, they had tons of time to kill somewhere. They were in a store of clothes, watches, etc. At that time, Jae-han was sitting in a cafe with a girl. He almost didn't listen to what she was saying. The blonde opened a card on his phone, then he asked the girl to go. She was telling him that place was great and it was no wonder it was popular on social media. Jaehyun was walking and looking at his phone. Suddenly, he glanced sideways and saw Pil-woo Yi Yoon-il, who was picking out a perfume. Suddenly, Pil-woo turned his head to Jae-han and their gazes met. Pil-woo hummed, Yoon-il sniffing at the scent, asking the man if he was listening to him. Pil-woo grabbed the guy's hand and moved closer to sniff. Yoon-il was immediately embarrassed. Jae-han grinned grimly, thinking in his head that he was nothing. There was a knock on Jae-han's office. It was Yoon-il. He brought him a cake. The man pretended like he was very happy and thanked the guy. It was like he was mocking the guy, saying he felt bad for making him do it on his day off, because there were supposed to be a lot of people there. Yoon-il replied that it was okay since he was going to go shopping anyway. Jaehyun, putting the cake aside, said it was a huge relief. Yoon-il, seeing that the man didn't open the cake, asked if he was going to taste it. Jaehyun replied that he had had enough sweets over the weekend, so he didn't want any now. Suddenly, Jaehyun suggested that Yoon-il have dinner for the two of them on Friday. The guy immediately agreed, but the man also suggested calling Pil-woo. But Yoon-il shuddered at the suggestion. He thought it would be just the two of them. Jaehyun asked Yoon-il to ask Pil-woo about dinner, because he thought his brother wouldn't agree if he was called by him. The blonde man asked Yoon-il not to worry. He wasn't going to talk about work. It was supposed to be a friendly dinner. He also asked to clear up some misunderstandings if there were any. The guy hugged his arm and agreed to call Pil-woo himself. Jae-chin thanked him and waited impatiently. Yoon-il opened the door to get into the car. The older brother asked where Pil-woo was. The guy said he would come himself. Yoon-il got into the car and saw the old man's helper in the mirror. He said hello to him. They all greeted each other and went to the hotel. At the entrance, they were greeted and shown where to go. A table was already prepared for them. When the waiter brought out the food, Yoon-il was surprised. Jaehyun explained that he had already ordered an order for them. This restaurant served excellent rack of lamb. They removed all the fat and grilled it. The man hoped Yoon-il would like it. The guy noticed that Chae-hyun knew the place well and asked if he was here often. The blonde replied that they sometimes came here for family dinners. Pil-woo, stopping by, said that it was funny that it was the first time he was here. Yoon-il called out to him, Chae-hyun, when his brother had already sat down, saying he thought he'd be late. The man didn't say anything back. Then Hae-hyun told them that it was the first time they had dinner like this with the three of them. Yoon-il laughed. The older man cheerfully told the guy that he hoped he liked the food. Yoon-il thanked him unhappily. Right now, all he could think about was finishing his dinner and leaving as soon as possible. Jae-hyun turned to Pil-woo, asking how he felt about working at the company, but the younger brother reminded him that they had agreed not to discuss work. The man laughed and replied that he had asked the question out of politeness. He didn't think it would look like a conversation about work. Pil-woo replied that he shouldn't have made small talk with him because he knew he didn't care about him. Ye-chun said it was just a misunderstanding. He decided to talk about something interesting and asked Pil-woo if he was dating anyone right now. Yoon-il flinched in surprise. Jae-hyun continued that since his brother hadn't lived in Korea for years and didn't know anyone here, he suggested that if Pil-woo was feeling lonely, he should introduce him to someone. Pil-woo silently looked at Yoon-il. He replied that it wasn't necessary because he wasn't that lonely and wasn't going to date anyone. Jae-hyun replied that he was sorry. Suddenly, he saw and informed Yoon-il that he had something near his mouth. Jae-hyun, reaching out to him, asked why he was eating so fast. The guy awkwardly replied that he was hungry. While Jae-hyun was wiping Yoon-il's mouth, Pil-woo was eating meat without mood. Suddenly, there was a knock at their door. The waiter brought them the wine he chose. The waiter poured first Jae-hyun, then Yoon-il. When he approached Pil-woo, Ye-chun suddenly said he didn't need to pour because he was driving and had yet to get home on his own. Jae-hyun discreetly pushed the waiter under his elbow. The wine spilled right on Pil-woo's head. Yoon-il immediately jumped up from his seat excitedly. The right side of his shirt was drenched in red wine. The waiter started to frantically apologize, but Pil-woo replied not to worry, because he knew it wasn't his fault. The waiter promised to bring something to wipe. Yoon-il froze, looking at him. Wine was dripping from Pil-woo. He looked sad. Suddenly, Yoon-il's heart began to race. He suddenly remembered a moment from his childhood when he saw blood being pumped out of Pil-woo. Yoon-il trembled. His head was pierced by pain. He suddenly staggered and sat down on his chair. Jae-hyun excitedly called out to him. Pil-woo worriedly jumped up from his seat. He quickly ran up to him and held him down. The guy was holding his head. Jae-hyun wanted to say something, but ran into the cold gaze of Pil-woo, who was gently cradling Yoon-il against him. Pil-woo helped Yoon-il up and said that he needed to rest. Jae-hyun got up next. Jae-hyun threw his cloak over himself. Pil-woo threw his cloak over Yoon-il, and they went out. Jae-hyun said he would take him home and wanted to say something else to Pil-woo, but he was suddenly called out by a girl walking up to him. She was happy about the coincidence. The blonde turned to her. The girl saw that he had finished dinner, so since they had met, she wanted to offer to stay with her. Jae-hyun didn't want to agree, but Pil-woo touched his shoulder and told him not to worry about them. He promised to take Yoon-il home. The guy had already completely deflected onto his chest. Jae-hyun wanted to stop him. The girl, seeing Yoon-il unconscious, worriedly asked if he was okay. The blonde man gloomily watched Pil-woo gently lead Yoon-il into the elevator. He hugged him and asked how he was feeling. Yoon-il was breathing heavily. Pil-woo drove Yoon-il to his house. He touched his shoulder to wake him up. The guy opened his eyes, not remembering when he called his address. The man asked how his head was. Yoon-il was feeling better. Pil-woo excitedly offered to show the doctor and get checked out, but Yoon-il assured him that he was fine. He thanked him and apologized for ruining dinner, since they so rarely get all together. But Pil-woo replied that he had only come to see the guy. He wasn't interested in such dinners at all, so he suggested that he should have a good rest this evening. Before walking out, Yoon-il visibly hesitated. He wanted to say something. The man turned his head towards him, waiting. The guy suggested him to stop by his house and take a shower before he went home. Pil-woo was surprised. Yoon-il hastily started to explain that he was embarrassed that the man drove him home, and he was uncomfortable sending him home in such a state, because he might have been uncomfortable, might have gotten cold, etc. Pil-woo, still surprised by the offer, agreed to come in. Getting out of the car, he thanked the guy and promised to take a quick shower and go home. They walked into Yoon-il's house. The guy never invited anyone to his house, so it felt weird now. Pil-woo stared ahead. Yunil showed him with his hand where the bathroom was. He noticed that the blonde man even had wine in his hair, so he let him wash himself completely. He promised to put clean clothes by the door for Pil-woo to change into. The man heading to the bathroom thanked him and promised to be back quickly. Yoon-il, undressing for a bit, hovered, wondering what that memory in the restaurant was all about. He vaguely remembered that Pil-woo was often sick when he was a kid. He assumed it was some kind of cure, but the expression on his face was dejected. Pil-woo quickly came back from the bath with his bare torso, wiping his wet hair. He thanked Yoon-il, for he felt much better. The guy shuddered, saying that it was fine. Suddenly, the man crouched down beside him. He thought that Yoon-il was still feeling bad, but the guy replied that he was already fine. Suddenly, Pil-woo slid his hand around Yoon-il's waist and plopped down on the couch and loomed over him. The guy stared at him in surprise. Pil-woo wondered what the guy was thinking when he invited him over to his place at such a late hour and offering him a shower, because he knew the blonde could barely contain himself around him. But Yoon-il tried to explain to him that he didn't have any ulterior motives. Pil-woo knew that, but he guessed that the guy was trying to remember. He noticed that Yoon-il was bothered by his memory problems, and he felt frustrated because of it. Pil-woo touched him and asked what he was like in his memories. Leaning close to him, the man said he hoped the guy wouldn't give up trying to remember. He asked to keep on and on thinking about him. After saying that, he kissed the main character. Suddenly, Yoon-il shoved him away and said that it didn't mean he agreed, but Pil-woo didn't let him finish. He promised to help him feel better because he had a lot of frustrations piled up. Yoon-il didn't understand what Pil-woo was talking about, but he suddenly flinched. The man reached for his pants, but the guy intercepted them and asked him to wait since he wasn't in the shower yet. But the blonde replied that it was okay. Pil-woo got his way, but the guy was pushing him away and said they couldn't do it. But it was a little late. As the man bent down between his legs, the guy was floundering and begging to stop, but Pil-woo wasn't listening to him. Yoon-il trembled. After everything, the guy started wiping the blonde man's face. The one withdrew his hand, assuming that the black-haired man was trying to mark territory that way. But he was fine with it, kissing him on the cheek, saying that he liked whatever he did. Yoon-il was lying on the couch hugging a pillow. Pil-woo was cooking in the kitchen. Seeing the guy's not-so-good condition, he asked if he was okay. The black-haired man felt like his body was about to fall apart into a million pieces. The man apologized as he finished cooking and turned to the guy, saying he needed to eat because he was too thin. Yoon-il got up and noticed that Pil-woo was wearing his clothes that he bought for him. The man asked how he looked. The guy admitted that the outfit looked good on him. When he picked it out, he was worried that the size wouldn't fit. But it fit Pil-woo perfectly. Pil-woo held out his hand, offering him breakfast. He helped him into the kitchen, saying that he had made something quick. The guy needed to eat well because he was going to have a hard day today. There was a lot of all sorts of food on the table for one person. Pil-woo made breakfast from what he found in the fridge. In his opinion, the food wasn't much, but enough to give the guy some energy. Yoon-il, looking at the table, was surprised that the man had done it all himself. He asked where Pil-woo had learned to cook. The blonde man said he had mastered the skill when he lived alone in the States. Yoon-il thanked him for the food. The man wished him a good appetite, and then took out a pill from his pocket and drank it. The guy noticing this was surprised that Pil-woo was taking the same pills as Jae-hyun. After drinking the pill, the man asked Yoon-il to try it, and promised that if he liked it, he would cook for him again next time. But Yoon-il picked up the food with his chopsticks, and irritably replied that he would never let any man in the house again. Pil-woo smiled sweetly. The guy tasted the food. It was delicious. Pil-woo, watching Yoon-il's reaction, smiled happily. The door opened, which caught Jae-hyun's attention. He saw Pil-woo coming up the stairs. His brother called out to him. The younger one turned around and said he slept over at Yoon-il's place. He said he was very tired and hurried upstairs. Jae-hyun was silent. He looked after Pil-woo and sipped thoughtfully from his mug, a vein in his face from the tightness of his jaw. The next day, Yoon-il was sitting at his workstation and tapping on his keyboard. Jae-hyun came out of the elevator. He was on the phone. The guy saw him and said hello cheerfully. The man pressed a finger to his lips, asking Yoon-il to be quieter. Blondie was talking to someone at work and was told that the special research team in the US would be transferred to Seoul, and learned that Chairman Nam had made the decision without consulting him beforehand. Jae-hyun didn't like it. Standing in front of the entrance to his office, he asked for all the documents to be sent to him. They had to scrutinize them so this decision wouldn't affect the current research. Yoon-il, meanwhile, didn't realize what was going on. Chae-hyun walked into his office and pressed his back against the door, holding his phone in one hand. Taking off his jacket, the man thought it was a pathetic sight to see someone struggling to cling to life in a body like that. He carelessly threw his jacket on the couch and went to the table. He got a text message on his phone from another girl. She was happy to meet him and hoped to continue. Jae-han, remembering his sick father, brother, and Yoon-il, abruptly opened a drawer in the nightstand, took out a jar of pills, and poured as many as 5 pills into his palm. The man, bringing them up to his mouth, didn't understand why everyone was trying to get in his way. A group of scientists came out of the elevator. Yoon-il excitedly said hello. The main man said that they were from the research group led by Nam. They had an urgent matter, so they wanted to go straight into Jae-han. Yoon-il stood up, apologizing, and replied that they needed to make an appointment first. But the scientists walked past the guy without stopping, and already opening the door to Jae-han's office. The black-haired man shouted for them to stop. He followed them into the office, shouting excitedly that they couldn't just break in like that. Jae-kin, smiling feignedly polite, asked the guy to go back to his workstation. Yoon-il brought coffee to Jae-hyun. He wanted to know what had happened because the man hadn't had such long mornings in a long time, and he was also outraged that the scientists hadn't coordinated the reception with him. Jae-kin remained silent. The black-haired man assumed it had to do with the chairman. He himself had noticed that the man constantly sought to speak to the blonde in private. Jae-hyun replied that they needed to restructure this research group quickly, and he would lead the process. He assured Yoon-il that he had everything under control. But Yoon-il wanted to do something to help the blonde man. The man, while sipping his coffee, latched onto that thought. Suddenly, he asked the guy to arrange for him to have dinner with Miss Ji-yeon from O Corporation, or if she was busy then with Miss Yarim. The black-haired man noticed that Jae-han looked tired, so he didn't think this was a good time for dating. The man decided to find out from the guy whether he was saying it because he was worried about him, or because he was annoyed that he was seeing other people. Jae-hyun cheekily sharply commented that he's already noticed that Yoon-il gets upset when he goes on a date with a girl. Yoon-il stood there puzzled. He timidly replied that he was just worried about him. Jae-hyun didn't believe him. He got up from his seat and walked up to the guy and irritably asked him if that's why he was dating Pil-woo. Yoon-il darkened and stared with huge surprised eyes at the blonde man. He began to back away from Jae-han little by little, mumbling that they just kept running into him and nothing more. Jae-han grabbed his head and exhaled tiredly, starting from afar. The man said that out of all the people, it was Yoon-il who should do his orders the best. The man insisted that the guy should do what he asked and be where he said. But Yoon-il, head down, didn't understand how he should do it. He threw his head up sharply, grabbing the man by his jacket, angrily reminding him that he'd been pushing him away since high school. It was a sunny day. Yoon-il and Jae-hyun were standing in a secluded spot. They were kissing. The guy pulled away from the blonde, smiling peacefully. But when he looked up to ask who they were to each other, stunned, he noticed Jae-hyun wiping his mouth, saying he couldn't. The black-haired man didn't realize how close he should be to the man, and that was why the guy hadn't even tried to tell Jae-hyun how he felt since that day. Every time, Yoon-il tried to forget Jae-han because he was afraid that he might give up on him at any moment. But the blonde guy kept shortening the distance, so Yoon-il was in love with him for many years. Yoon-il, standing in front of Jae-han, didn't understand what the guy meant then by can't. He thought about it a lot but couldn't find an answer. He wished the man didn't need him because then he wouldn't be in so much pain. Jae-hyun replied that he was doing everything for his family. He leaned over Yoon-il, placing his hand on his cheek, demanding that the guy keep doing what he says. He asked the guy to only think about him because it was his job. Jae-hyun didn't want Yoon-il to pay attention to anyone else but him. The man wanted to say something more about Pil-woo, but his phone vibrated and he answered it, waving his hand in front of the guy, telling him to go to his room. Yoon-il snickered as he walked out of the study, closing the door, pondering his words about not paying attention to anyone but Jae-han, sadly thinking that this was exactly what he had always wanted to say to the man. Yoon-il, washing his face, remembered that he and Jae-hyun never finished their conversation. The man left the office, talking on the phone, telling the guy that he would drive to the meeting and then home from there. Yoon-il made his way to the room, thinking that he was being too hard on Jae-han. After all, he was very busy with work right now. He picked up his phone, thinking of texting the man to apologize. The black-haired man fell face down on the bed. It was too late for a message. so he decided to apologize when they saw each other at the office. The boy lay there regretting being so rude to Yakin, for he knew more than anyone how difficult the man was. But that was why he had fallen in love with Jaechan. Jaehan was always surrounded by people. In high school, the kid would walk down the hallway with other classmates, negotiating a game of soccer. Jaechan was perfect, for he had attractive looks, a generous personality, good grades, and a well-to-do family. The blonde walked into the classroom and saw Yoon-il sitting with a girl at a desk explaining a lesson to her. He walked over to them and put his arm around the black-haired man, asking what they were talking about. The girl perked up at the sight of Jaehan. She told him that she was having trouble solving the problems, so she asked Yoon-il to help her. Jaehyun explained what to do with these tasks, and the girl wanted to ask more questions, but the guy interrupted her and said that he and Yoon-il had to go, because they had a lab in the next class. The blonde guy took the guy under his arm and led him towards the exit. As they stepped out into the hallway, Jaehyun noticed that Yoon-il was popular with the girls, but the guy laughed and replied that it wasn't what he thought. But Jaehyun continued that they looked like they had become friends. Yoon-il revealed that the girl only wanted to talk to him to get close to him since he's always by his side. The blonde called it a rude act, but Yoon-il wasn't worried because he thought Jaehyun wasn't interested in the girls who hung out with him. But Jaehan didn't remember saying such a thing as they continued to banter with each other as they climbed the stairs. Suddenly, the girl called out Yoon-il. She was asked to hand out everyone's graded papers, so Mina handed the guys their papers. When the girl left, Jaehyun continued to poke fun at him. A text message came on Yoon-il's phone. Jaehan wrote that he would be 10 minutes late. The guys standing by the window in the same class with the black-haired man were talking to each other. They heard that Sungmin called Jaehan to ask him out. Yoon-il, hearing them, wasn't even surprised anymore. Putting his textbooks into his backpack, he thought that if he was a girl, he would have fallen in love with the blonde man too. He remembered how the guy had helped him a lot after his injury. He suddenly realized that he had been attached to Jaechan since elementary school. Now thinking about it made him uncomfortable. A blonde man walked into the classroom and said they could go. Yoon-il didn't expect his friend to come back so quickly. Jaehyun grabbed his hand and pulled him towards the exit. The guys in the class looking at the blonde man were sure to give Mina a rejection. Yoon-il asked about the girl. Jaehyun turned her down. The guy was curious why, since he usually dated girls who approached him first. Jaehyun revealed that she wasn't interested in him. Mina liked Yoon-il, so she asked him to help her. But the blonde man refused. The black-haired man stopped in surprise, not expecting the girl to like him. Jaehyun revealed that Mina asked him to set up a date, but he refused because he thought Yoon-il would have rejected her anyway. But the guy wasn't happy, because he couldn't know for sure if he would have turned her down or not. Jaehan admitted that he didn't want anyone to be more important to him than he was. Yoon-il, recalling this episode in his life, reflected that many things seemed normal to Jaehyun, but that normal didn't always mean good to Jaehyun. Normal meant he just didn't care, so when something involving black hair fell into the not good category for Jaehan, it made him feel special. Yoon-il was determined to apologize to Jaehan tomorrow at the office because even though he knew that this feeling of that he was special might hurt him, he couldn't stop hoping. In the office, the researchers surrounded Jaehyun. Yoon-il was happy to see that the man had come early today. Jaehyun wrinkled his nose tiredly at the researchers who surrounded him, actively discussing something. The man asked them to stop talking. He opened his eyes. Yoon-il happily wanted to apologize, but Jaehan suddenly fainted. The scholars and Yoon-il looked at the man fearfully. Pil-woo came running into the hospital, panting. He looked at Yoon-il excitedly, clenching his hand tightly into a fist. He was already burying his brother with feigned regret. But the guy asked him to stop, because Jaehyun had just fainted from overexertion. Pil-woo asked what Yoon-il was doing here. The black-haired man was told that Jaehyun needed to take some more tests. Also, Yoon-il told him that the researchers were here. The boy assumed that the younger brother was worried about Jaehan because he'd noticed the man running all the way here. But Pil-woo had lied that he'd come because he had business to attend to. A swarthy man with black hair came out of the door, saying they hadn't seen Yoon-il and Pil-woo in a while. The guy immediately stood up, not realizing who was talking to them. The man hugged Yoon-il tightly, a little upset that the guy didn't remember him. He squeezed his waist, saying that he used to be a little boy, but now he had grown into a full-grown man. Pil-woo sharply pushed the man away from Yoon-il, angrily telling him to remove his hands. The man grinned at Pilwoo's attempts to build an important bumpkin in front of Yoon-il. He finally decided to reintroduce himself in front of Yoon-il. His name was Park Hyun, and he was the lead researcher. Park Hyun had taken care of Pilwoo since he moved to the States, even considering himself his father, something the man strongly disagreed with. He never thought of him that way. Park Hyun grinned and noticed that while they hadn't seen with Pilwoo, he had become more confident. Park invited them to come inside. After all, Jaehyun was already awake and could receive guests. Jaehyun was sitting under an IV. He smiled at the guys, apologizing for making a fuss. Yoon-il was concerned about the man's condition, so excitedly shouted that the schedule had to be changed. Park Hyun raised his voice, saying that Jaehyun needed to take better care of himself because he risked being in a wheelchair like the chairman because his body was different from the usual. They still couldn't cure themselves of the chronic disease, something that was hereditary in their family. Yoon-il didn't understand what it was about. Park turned to Pilwoo. He suspected that the man had been skipping his medication since he returned to Korea. The man always had to remind him about it. The blonde man grudgingly replied that he would figure it out himself. Park Hyun, poking mockingly at a disgruntled Pilwoo, threatened that if he fainted, he wouldn't allow Yoon-il to visit him. Suddenly, Yeshin spoke arrogantly, saying that should he, like the others, suffer from some hereditary disease, Park Hen, placing his hand on Jaehyun's bed, was annoyed that the man still believed he was an exception, even now that he was lying in a hospital bed due to fainting out of the blue. The man straightened up and looked at the pensive Yoon-il. He suddenly grabbed his face for the guy to look at him and said that maybe it was because the guy was always around. Yoon-il didn't understand anything. Pilwoo slapped the man's hand hard to get him to let the guy go. He angrily asked him to go outside to talk. And without waiting, Park left the room. The swarthy man stroked Yoon-il's head and promised that they would see each other again. Park Hyun was the doctor who did research on Pilwoo. As a child, he also stroked little Yoon-il. The man said he was amazing. The guy suddenly remembered this moment from his childhood. Park left the room. Jaehyun and Yoon-il were left alone, Yoon-il looking at the door, only now remembering that they had met before when he was a kid. At this time, Jaehyun was silent. He gloomily wondered what his father was thinking. After all, he didn't want Yoon-il to meet someone who was involved in that incident. He thought there was probably a reason why Park was here. On paper, he was sure it was because of his father's condition. But it would be more efficient to stay in America to continue researching a new drug. Publicly, Park Hyun was known as his father's confidant, but he spent a great deal of time with Pilwoo, so Jaehyun suspected that the man had gone over to his brother's side. Jaehyun decided he should continue to watch him. The guy sat in the chair across from Yahen, carefully covering him with a blanket. He asked him to lie down for a while. Yoon-il had heard that Jaehyun would have to spend about a week in the hospital, so he warned the man he could ask him to bring something. Yakin replied that the whole situation reminded him of his high school days. The guy guessed that the man was talking about the moments when he was in the hospital. Yakin defiantly said it was time for Yoon-il to repay him for that kindness. So he ordered the guy to come to him every day so he wouldn't be bored. Yoon-il agreed and promised that he would take care of all the business in the company, so Jaehyun could rest easy. Outside in the gazebo, Park Hyun and Pilwoo were talking, the man twirling a flower in his hands, wondering if Yoon-il's memory had been restored. Pilwoo averted his eyes and said it was none of his business, but Park kindly said it would be his business soon because they were close to finding a cure. Pilwoo wasn't going to give Yoon-il to his team in any way, but the man replied that he wouldn't have a choice because the moment Yoon-il's memories came back, everything that was happening would prove to be too much for Pilwoo to handle. Pilwoo was clacking away on his keyboard. Yoon-il was sitting in Jaehyun's room, asking if he was worried about being in the hospital for 3 days now. The man was fine with it, all the more pleased that the guy had taken care of all the urgent matters. The man stopped typing at those words. Yoon-il averted his eyes and said it was his job. Yoon-il noticed that it was getting cooler, so he offered to bring the man a coat. But Jaehyun replied that he could ask the people at home to do it. Jaechin suddenly suggested taking a shower before going out. After all, his room had a wonderful bathtub. At this suggestion, Pilwoo clacked the keyboard button with all his might. Silence hung. Everyone looked at Pilwoo. Jaehyun was happy with this reaction of his. He continued to test his brother's patience by offering Yoon-il to sleep over. A vein protruded on Pilwoo's cheek. Jaekin turned to the younger man and thanked him for visiting him every day. He hadn't expected Pilwoo to care so much for his older brother. But the younger man rudely replied that he wasn't here for him. He almost didn't lie that he was without a car, so he asked Yoon-il to give him a ride. Jae-hyun guessed that the younger brother had left the car at home on purpose. Pil-woo was starting to get angry, he replied as he continued to work, saying that it was none of his business. Jae-chun spoke to Yoon-il. He knew the guy had gone to the mall today. He wondered why. The guy said he went to buy bellroot extract because he had heard it was a good gift for someone in the hospital. He had almost forgotten and reached into the bag. He pulled out a bellflower root and held it out to Jae-hyun, admitting he wasn't sure it would help him much. But he had heard the root was good for immunity. Yoon-il was curious how Jae-hyun knew he was at the mall. The man hesitated for a second, smiling sweetly, saying the driver told him. The guy assumed he'd seen him go out at lunchtime. Jae-hyun thanked him for the gift. Pil-woo sat frowning. He glanced unkindly at his brother. It was already dark. Pil-woo and Yoon-il were putting on their jackets. They said goodbye to Jae-hyun, promising to see him tomorrow. Jae-hyun asked if Pil-woo would come tomorrow too. The younger brother put his arm around Yoon-il's shoulders and turned to his brother and said that he would accompany Yoon-il until he was discharged. Yoon-il, while driving, asked Pil-woo not to be so hard on Jae-hyun. After all, he wasn't well. He urged the blonde man to think that it was hard for his brother to run the company with this hereditary disease. The man remained silent. Pil-woo, remembering all of his encounters with Jae-hyun, suddenly came to some sort of thought. Yoon-il noticed that the blonde wasn't listening to him at all. They drove up to Pil-woo's house. Yoon-il said this to the man, but he didn't pay any attention to his words. It bothered him that the guy didn't like going to the hospital with him. He made a sad face, asking if he was disturbing them much. But that wasn't what Yoon-il meant. He was just asking Pil-woo to show more concern for Jae-hyun. Pil-woo asked the guy to kiss him and promised that if he did, he wouldn't go to the hospital with him from tomorrow. Yoon-il reminded the man that he promised not to do that again. The man unbuckling his belt and admitting that he was just looking for an excuse because he wanted to kiss him. Pil-woo asked permission, but the black-haired man wouldn't allow it and asked him to go home. But the man insisted, at least for one kiss. He rested his head on his shoulder and promised that it would only take 10 seconds. Yoon-il, after a bit of silence, still agreed to only do it once, and that starting tomorrow, the man wouldn't go to the hospital with him. Yoon-il unbuckled his belt and kissed Pil-woo. The boy pulled away, saying that was enough. But the man put 2 hands around the black-haired man's neck and pulled him tighter against him. The guy in the kiss asked how long he was going to do this. Pil-woo asked for just a little longer. He started pressing Yoon-il against the door a little, piling on top of him. Pil-woo pulled away from him. The guy asked him to stop, but the man kept licking him everywhere, gradually unbuttoning his shirt, pulling the fabric down a bit. He bit Yoon-il's shoulder and then pulled away. Before getting out, he asked the guy to be careful on the way home. When he got out of the car, Yoon-il shouted at him unhappily and embarrassed. Yoon-il, left alone, all red, slumped on the steering wheel. He couldn't believe that his body had reacted to Pil-woo like this. Finally pulling himself together, he drove home.